right, you ready to roll, man?
I'm ready,
cool.
man.
All right, well, Matt Brost, welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
Thank you. I'm great. I've thought about doing podcasts a lot, and to be honest, after seeing your podcast, I'm like, yep, I'm not going to do that.
Wait. No. I want this to encourage people. I don't want to discourage competition. I think it's, I don't know, man. Everything that is, I don't think what makes this podcast great is I just get to show up and I just get to talk and have people like you come on the show. The rest of the like technical stuff, if I tried to replicate this, would never happen.
Yeah.
So that's also why I've like once I've done this, I feel like I don't know if I ever want to do a podcast again unless it's in a setup like this, because it's like you always feel like you'd be taking a step back, you know, at that point. Or when you do virtual ones too, you got to deal with streaming on Zoom, and is there a little bit of a lag or a phone only? Like, does it sound like somebody's on a phone? There's all sorts of technical crap that you don't have to think about, which is nice. But glad to have you, man. Glad you came. That blazer, by the way, is nice, man. Where'd you get that?
You know what? It's we're right at almost October. You can wear this like kind of this time of year, right?
Yeah.
So
well, in Texas, as soon as it drops like in the 80s, you're like, yes, fall clothing.
yes,
man.
here comes the wool.
Here comes all the heavy wool. Well, good to have you, man. You just drove up the tollway, right? You guys are 121 on the toll.
Yeah,
correct?
we're right in the Granite Park area, so this is pretty easy.
So be honest, how often do you go down into the boardwalk for lunch? Is that a daily?
I bet 4 times a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, Union Bear is my spot. So
Union Bear.
if you're going to have lunch with me, a lot of times it's going to be at Union Bear.
Is that why we had drinks at Union Bear?
Yes.
Oh, okay, it all makes sense. It's a good
good
spot.
for lunch. It's good for happy hour. They don't have breakfast, so I haven't figured out the breakfast spot yet.
Yeah, man, that location is great. And I used to office out of there. I think I told you I was in the common desk there. And I probably ended up at Chips or Union Bear 3 times a week. And but if it was brutally hot, you know, it's a 10-minute walk. So it's kind of like, Yeah. But I do miss that down there. But good to have you, man. I hope it was an easy commute up. We have the unique connection here that we both went to the same high school, albeit a couple years apart. So Mansfield High School, right?
I know, we're Tigers, man. You're a little bit younger than me.
Just a couple years, though, right?
I know,
was
but
01 graduate.
It's a huge difference in Mansfield because when I graduated, there was one high school.
Yeah,
I was the last class that graduated one high school.
Well, see, I was in the transition. So, I think my junior year is when we started going to the new campus. I guess that turned into Summit, I believe, is what it was. But yeah, it was weird where you had a 10 or 15-minute window where you literally had to drive to another campus. Like, why do I have one class over here and one class over here? But Mansfield was bursting at the seams at that time, and now it's what, 5 high schools or 6?
I think
maybe?
It might be 6, and I think now there's like a 6A.
A 6A,
yeah. So I think most of those schools are either 5A or 6A. But yeah, it was a cool place to grow up, that's for sure. And I know we've got a lot of mutual friends, so it's been pretty cool to connect with.
Well, yeah, Mansfield is a pretty small place at the end of the day. I mean, some people kind of stay there, and that's totally cool. I've left, but then it's like you still have that connection to people, and you're like, oh, what's so and so doing, or well, they're doing, you kind of get the small town feedback of where everybody is 20 years later. Speaking of, I'm 20 years on now from graduating high school, which is crazy, man.
Gosh,
it makes you feel old.
Yeah. So I'm 23.
You're 23. Yeah. It's, I feel like one of these days I'll get back. But anyways, enough about Mansfield. I do want to get into the golf, obviously the golf career. But before we do most of that, before we get into, of course, today the subject matter will be self-funding and the broker agency side of the equation. Like to just hear about you as a person, family, kids, things like that. Get to know you, and then we'll jump into golf, which I think some people want to hear about too.
Well, love it. Just like we said, I grew up in Mansfield, Texas. I went on to go to the University of Texas after that. But actually in high school, I met my high school sweetheart, Jess.
Nice.
And still married to this day, 19 years. We've got 2 little girls, 8 and 12 years old. Actually, gosh, 10 and 12.
So I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, 10 and 12. It's hard to think about a whole lot of things outside of work and family right now, for sure. We're in the depths of it.
Oh, well, Q4, of course, and then just like, a couple kids. I've got a couple kids myself. It is pretty much work, family most of the time, and then running to different appointments and soccer games, which I have soccer practice tonight. I've got a coach for the Mermaids, which will be fun. So you said 8 and 10 kiddos?
Yeah, no, 10 and 12.
10 and 12,
Sorry,
excuse me.
I misspoke first. But 10 and 12. I've got one. My 10-year-old's playing golf, and she is just addicted to golf.
Okay.
And then my 12-year-old is playing volleyball, and we just entered into the club world of volleyball. And I had no idea how much of a pull that would be on our family. But, she's practicing probably 4 to 6 hours a a week of volleyball now.
And are you guys traveling as well, I presume?
We will be.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more of a spring season than it is a fall season, but they're preparing us for the spring. It's going to be a lot of travel.
Yeah, when I entered into the club world for soccer, man, it's like every vacation revolved around soccer. What could you do depending on, well, do I have a game the next day, or, you know, where could I go? And then there's a spring season, a fall season, as well as the high school soccer season. So it was almost a year-round endeavor, and your life revolves around it. But you kind of figure out at that point, when you get competitive, you want to do it, right? You want to be involved in it, and the parents have to pick up the slack for all the logistics and the cost, of course, as well.
Yeah. It'll probably be mostly my beautiful wife that'll be picking up that slack. So
yeah, but
maybe not on the cost side, but that's a together thing.
Yeah.
So,
But the good news is, hopefully, you know, there could be scholarships at the end of the rainbow for that, and so the ROI is strong, and it, you know, it builds character for the kids as well.
No doubt.
So golf, you obviously played golf in high school. Must have been a pretty darn good golfer. But so tell me about when you got into that world.
Yeah, man. I was moved to Texas when I was 10 years old. Had never touched a golf club in my life. I lived in Ohio. There's obviously great golf courses in Ohio, but that wasn't anything that I was ever introduced to. Moved to Texas, and we moved on to a golf course in Mansfield at Walnut Creek Country Club. And just kind of fell in love with it. And I would say by the time I was 13, kind of quit everything else, baseball, tennis, that kind of stuff, and pursued golf. And, you know, became a good little golfer to get into the University of Texas and have a scholarship there. You know, I had a good time at Texas, and then I decided to play professional golf.
Yeah, I was going to say, was there a point when you knew you were really good at it? Because you started, that 10 seems kind of late to start, is it not? Or is that common for golf to start a little later?
I would say it's probably a healthy time to start,
is it? Okay.
To be honest. Saw a lot of kids that started when they're 7 or 8, and they were burnt out by the time that they were 12.
Okay.
So, but yeah, started at 10. I would say when I was 13 is when, you know, at the country club, people are like, Matt's really good. You better start getting him serious lessons and that kind of stuff. So I started getting lessons from a guy named Randy Smith, who's here in Dallas. He was Justin Leonard's coach at the time. Now he's Scotty Scheffler's coach, who was just in the Ryder Cup. And so Randy was my guy. And I would see Randy often and continue to, you know, get better. And then I would say when I was 15 years old is when, you know, golf is a pretty political game.
Okay.
And so when you're a junior, we had these tournaments called the AJGA Tour, and they were the national tour. And if you could get into an AJGA tournament, it was a special thing. There were only like 2 a week at the time. Now there was only 2 a month at the time. Now there's like 2 a week. And so only the best players in the country could get into AJGA tournaments. So I couldn't get into those, but they would have these qualifiers. Okay. And then all of a sudden when I was 15, I qualified for what was like the U.S. Open of junior golf. And had never broken 75 in my life at this time in a tournament, and I shot 68 in the qualifier. And kind of, I can feel myself out there right now. I'll never forget this, right? Yeah. And then I get into the first round, and I shot 68 in the first round. Second round, I shot 70. And remember, like a week before this, I had never broken 75.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I was in the lead going into the final round, playing with Lucas Glover and Charles Howell, and shot 80. But at the same time, I was kind of on the map at that point.
Sure.
I could get into whatever tournament I wanted, and that was kind of cool. So that obviously
I was
paved the way
going to ask
to Texas.
you know, was it just the pressure? Do you think initially, like, just being able to respond to a pressure situation, competitive situation, while you shot so well early on? Or what do you think it was to go all of a sudden never breaking 75 into breaking 70 twice? Well,
that golf is that way, to where all of a sudden you kind of get to that next level and you just never turn back, really. Okay. So, and that's what I used to, you know, do a little teaching on the side and that kind of stuff with golf. And I was encouraging the people that I was working with, like, if you're trying to break 80, you're all of a sudden going to shoot 75, and you're never going to look back.
Okay.
So yeah, I would just say it was all of a sudden I was good enough, because obviously it wasn't the pressure piece, because I kind of blew it in that third round when I really had all the pressure. And so, yeah, I would just say all of a sudden it just kind of clicked at the right time.
So it clicked at the right time, obviously kind of put yourself on the map, continue to evolve, I guess. And then, so tell me about, Soccer's a little different where kind of the elite of the elite might bypass college sometimes and go straight to the pros. Is it typical for even if you're really, really high level to continue on to college to develop, or do some of the players bypass college altogether as well?
Yeah, still here in the States, yes.
Okay.
It's very typical to still go to college. You might not finish all 4 years, but you're going to go to college for the most part. And I would say that's evolved a little bit to where now, you might go to 2 years of school and you go pro, but still, for the most part, the best players in the country, they're going to do 4 years of college.
Okay.
I don't know why golf has panned out to be different than other sports that way, because obviously there's a huge carrot financially if you go pro. But still, it just seems like most of the people that get into college golf, they want to stick it out and get their degree. And so, yeah, went to Texas and played 4 years there.
Well, I presume even though golf's got a lot longer shelf life, right, of a professional career versus maybe something that's super, super taxing on the body. Could that play into it, knowing
Maybe,
that
yeah.
4 years in college is not that detrimental to a career?
Yeah, that's probably a good way to look at it. I haven't thought of it that way. But, yeah, if you get on the PGA Tour, there's a good chance you're going to have a 20-year career playing golf.
So then flash me forward, though. Obviously, that was – people are probably wondering why we talked about golf for 10 minutes now, but it's because you spent 5 years of your career as a professional golfer. So tell me about transitioning into that and actually doing that full-time for a living.
Yeah. So I was an All-American when I played golf at Texas. And so it's usually kind of inevitable that you're going to try out playing professionally. And I married my wife right out of college very quick. She was actually still in her senior year of school.
Okay.
And so for her and I, we really just kind of got together and prayed and just kind of said, we're going to give it 5 years. Okay. I had sponsors that were going to take care of me for 5 years. And she caddied for me. We had an RV that we just traveled the country with.
Cool.
So it was a really, really cool experience. But when it came down to it, I played pretty high level during that time. I never got full status on the PGA Tour. So I was never a PGA Tour player, but I was on the nationwide tour and that kind of stuff. And but yeah, that 5-year mark hit. I missed the tour by one shot at Q school, but just decided I'm ready to get in the real world, I guess. So.
Well, was there an element of that? Obviously there's a dream that's associated with that, but was there an element of that also going, like, I'm happy to be done with it? Was there a part of you that was enjoyed the notion of perhaps moving on, or did it always feel like maybe there was just a little bit of the missed opportunity or something like that? I'm curious to the psychology.
Yeah, I think I was prepared to get out of the grind at that moment. But then I would say the 2 years after that, I did experience it's always the beginning of the PGA Tour season, because they start in Hawaii and then the next week is in Palm Springs and the next week's at Pebble Beach. Yeah. And I'm like, man, it's really cold here in Texas. I wish I could be in that schedule. But for the first 2 years, there was certainly some bitterness because all the players out there I used to play with all the time, beat them a good amount. And so you feel like you can be out there. But at the same time, I was pretty happy with what was going on.
The way I look back at it too, like there was a point where the writing was on the wall. Soccer was done for me. I had aspirations at one point that I could perhaps play at a level of pro, whatever level it may have been. But then you start, I was 23, 24 at the time college ended because of injuries and some transfers. And there was almost this point was like, that chapter is now done. Like I love soccer, but I'm okay with, if I don't pick up the cleats again, if I don't put them on, if I don't coach. I didn't really want to go into coaching. And so there was a point was like, maybe I'll just reinvent myself. Maybe I'll figure out what I do now for the rest of my life, which was kind of exciting, nerve-wracking at the same time, which it sounds like you made a kind of a hybrid transition out of being a pro, but you worked at a golf, of course, you were a manager or something at a golf
General
club?
manager.
General manager, okay. So you still got to be around the game, but you weren't playing as much, of course. So what was that like? Was that a good way to transition into a different world at some point, or what motivated you to start there?
Yeah. I had no idea what I was going to do after I missed that putt on that last hole in Q school.
Is it really down to
year.
one putt? Like, it
really was,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, if I had made that putt, I would have played another year.
Okay.
There's no doubt. But missed that putt, and I had no idea what I was going to do. My wife and I actually had like a mission trip planned right after that in Ethiopia, and that's all we knew that was going to be after that putt, whether I made it or missed it. So missed it, and then the natural progression is to look in the golf industry. I mean, I'm a golfer. That's what I know. And just happened to play in a charity golf tournament with a guy named Blake Walker, who's now the CEO of Arcus Golf, which is one of the larger management companies. And he gave me my first job in the golf industry, which was a general manager job at a country club. And that kind of progressed over a 3-year period of time of being in that industry, managing golf courses. And it was a great experience. There's no doubt.
But that I guess was the end of at least that chapter from a professional standpoint of golf. And so now we'll get into, the relevant conversation to this, the podcast, but we started in benefits, but it sounded like you started your own practice at first. So you had an insurance agency doing what, personal lines, or tell me about that.
Yeah. So it was Brost Insurance Agency, and started that right out of my career, being a general manager. And yeah, it was a personal line small business insurance agency. I actually had a golf simulator in there, so the two things kind of blended a little bit.
Of course.
But yeah, had that agency. It grew and thrived. It was a pretty good agency, but I started to really realize like my desire to build relationships with my clients. In personal lines, it was so transactional, that it was challenging for me to want to take somebody out to play golf and pay that $100 or $200 for them to play golf and realize I just spent all my commissions for the entire year. I'm taking that.
The ROI doesn't compute on that.
Yeah. So, it was pretty quick that I realized that, maybe my skill set was going to be better with, clients that, were larger accounts when it came down to
was there a connection to the insurance industry to start, though? Because you seem like completely different things. So who got you into the industry?
No, it was just member after member kind of saying, Matt, you need to be in a role that develops relationships. And everybody was just, I think it was, you saw so many insurance people playing golf all the time that I thought, okay, they're doing something. I would say I'm probably playing golf less than I ever have, to be honest now. But at the same time, there's a lot of insurance people that play golf, and they're always encouraged me to get into the business.
Did you know anybody that helped you kind of set the agency up, though, to start? I mean, because I'm sure there was a learning curve there, right?
So, yeah, it was a farmer's insurance agency, and from the commercial side, we were we could kind of do whatever we wanted, but the personal line side was captive to farmers. And so there was a district manager that connected me and really kind of helped me get it going.
Cool.
So, yeah.
So, but there was a point you said they got too transactional. You're probably just dealing with people once a year, right, at renewal time and fielding questions, service, stuff like that. Was there somebody in your ear talking about benefits, or, how did you go, all right, I'd rather be in the group world than the personal world?
So I was hosting a Bible study that was in my office in this insurance agency, and one of the guys that came to the Bible study was Den Bishop. Okay. And Den is the president of Holmes Murphy. And so just over some time of getting to know Den, he's still a great friend. And he, I kind of learned about, that side of things from Den, and Holmes Murphy offered me an opportunity. So I went over to Holmes Murphy.
So did you like the group side? Was it a good transition? Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was a great transition. And Holmes Murphy was a great place to work. I actually went in, focused on property and casualty.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. And so, at Holmes Murphy, the Dallas office is a pretty large benefits hub. And so you can't help but just kind of breathe in the benefits air when it comes down to it. And that's kind of where that transition happened too.
Well, there's still a strong transactional element to the commercial side, correct? Or P&C side, a little more so than benefits, or is that a misunderstanding on my part?
I would say maybe the execution of the work that happens on the P&C side might be a little bit more transactional. Okay. But I would say the relationship on the P&C side starts with the C-suite. It's a harder place to get, when it comes down to it. And so I would say sometimes the P&C side could be more relationship driven. I think when it comes down to the benefits side, you got to tell somebody why, because it's a huge pull to change a broker. It's a large change for the HR department, et cetera. And so you've got to have a pretty significant why I would hire you to be my broker, in my opinion.
That's fair. I mean, is there more emphasis on strategy, you think, in the benefit space than P&C, or again?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm like,
there's
P&C
probably a bunch of P&C guys.
Yeah,
there's probably a bunch of P&C people.
This is wrong. That's wrong.
But yeah, I would say there's a lot more moving parts. There's a lot more involvement throughout the year when it comes down to benefits. I like to say on the P&C side, you have one client. And if you're working with a company that has 100 employees on the EB side, you've got 100 clients.
Fair enough.
And so that brings an extra weight, in my opinion. So, yeah.
So was it a slow transition though into benefits, or was there a point where you're just like, that's what I prefer to do? How do I get in the space? Like, tell me about that.
So I would say, yeah, I mean, you know, it happened pretty quick at Holmes Murphy when I was there. And this is, you know, I focused on captive business when I was on the P&C side, which is super cool. And, but then over time, I kind of had a role called Enterprise Development Officer, and which basically meant that, you know, everything that they did as an enterprise, I was able to offer to prospects and clients.
Okay.
And so I kind of played both sides, but then it wasn't until my most frequent, you know, my latest career, which was being involved in Simple Pay, that I truly just went all in on benefits when it comes down to it. Yeah.
Well, I can totally appreciate the going all in on benefits. But before we get kind of there, though, I'd like to, since I've never worked in the world of selling to an individual, right, like what you were doing with your agency versus the benefits world. I've only known benefits, and most of it goes through the brokered kind of distribution channel, and you're working with an employer, the HR staff, the CFO, things like that. From a sales approach perspective, kind of tell me about relationship building on the individual side versus trying to build a relationship over time with the decision makers at an employer. I'd like to hear the difference in the selling process there.
Yeah, and this is going to be different for everybody. On the individual side, I believe it's a lot more relationship driven. I mean, and that also goes with the fact that it's transactional, which sounds weird. That's kind of two different things, right? But the reason is it is a transaction. Mm-hmm. And so if I have a relationship with that person, I'm probably going to go with that person. Whereas on the group side of things, for me, you've got to have that why. Like, we might be best friends, but if I can't tell you why you should hire me as your broker, probably not going to get your business, you know? So it's more of a business decision on the group side, whereas on the personal side, it seems to be more of just a relationship, personal decision. Other than those people that don't have a relationship with an agent, then they call Geico, you know, when it comes down to it.
Yeah, so. Fair enough. I mean, at the end of the day, I think moving your auto policy is a lot simpler than moving your benefits over and going fully insured to self-funded and, you know, doing all those things. Of course, that's a lot more complex. So it does make sense. It seems like a contradiction to say relationship and transaction go hand in hand, but I think I would agree with you there. So, you know, you're going into the benefits world. Now you're trying to kind of learn the language, learn the lingo, of course, speaking to kind of different audience at that point. Tell me about kind of developing your sales strategy and your messaging and stuff like that. I mean, was there a learning curve there to kind of get the acronyms and the jargon and all that stuff, be comfortable with that?
Yeah, there's a learning curve, but I would say most people have a lot of grace. If you don't know an acronym or something, just ask, right? And I'm naturally a learner, so I'm willing to ask when it comes down to it. But yeah, that was there was no doubt kind of some growth there, and you know, I'm actually kind of forgetting the gist of your question.
No, that's okay. I just kind of understanding when you're going in and you're talking about the why with a prospect, right? Yeah. The why, it's got to involve something unique, a differentiator, so strategy, approach, you know, those things like that. So just kind of honing that message over time, I'm sure it takes some curation and takes a little bit of effort. So just kind of getting a sense of personal to group and what the difference is in your sales approach and the strategy approach would be. Yeah.
Well, I put a lot of time into why. Obviously, you know, I've mentioned it a lot already, you know, during this time just talking to you, but the why for me is tremendously important. In me coming to this new role where I'm at right now at BSBD, I've spent a lot of time on the why. Because BSBD is very historically like just uber relationships. Like the relationships that they have with their clients are unbelievable. But on the benefit side, I believe that there's got to be a why. And so I've spent a lot of time on that. I really like to kind of ripple things up, and I learned from amazing people, right? I've got Den that I've learned a lot from. I've also, you know, worked with a guy named Wally Goma, who's over at ACAP Health too, learned a ton from him. And I've heard people talk about a why in a pretty amazing way. And so really when it comes down to it for me, I think benefits is pretty complex. I think there's a lot of moving parts. And so if you can create this story that's really simple for somebody, and for us, we look at cost, service, and people. And how are we stewarding cost? How are we providing superior service? And how are we impacting your people? And then all the tentacles that kind of go off of that. And really diversifying yourself with those tentacles, but then also diversifying yourself with this simple message of cost, service, and people. That's what we're doing.
Cost, service, people. Is that trademarked, I presume, or something like that? But it's good.
Maybe this podcast made a
maybe
trademark.
now it's official on record. So cost, service, people. But I think you're right though. People can get so fixated on the technicals, and I can prove that I've got the right strategy by whiteboarding and showing you I know everything, showing how smart I am. At the end of the day, if you can't tell the people the story in a simple way that they can understand, because it is so sophisticated, especially when you talk about kind of unbundled self-funding and pulling together vendors and how they coordinate with each other and things like that, it can seem overwhelming to somebody that's not initiated. But if you can tell them a story that's simple as to the motivations for doing this, the why they're doing it, leave the logistics, making the sausage up to somebody like you that knows how to do it. But if you can't tell a story, then they're just going to gloss over, right?
I think we make way too many assumptions, assuming that our prospects and clients actually understand all the stuff that's coming out of our mouth,
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for us to make that story as simple as possible and very understandable without making it elementary, right? But to me, you looked at things like a mind graph kind of deal, and that's what I do. And I just saw 3 main categories of the way that we serve and focus for our clients, and just kind of the tentacles that come off of that.
I love that, man. That's great. So when did you get introduced to self-funding though? I'm curious, was that just like a completely like out of left field type idea, or was there some, I guess there's some self-funding in P&C, right? And you said captives. Tell me about that.
In all honesty, that was my introduction to self-funding, was in property and casualty with captives. And so, and I fell in love with the captive concept in property and casualty. And obviously when you come over to benefits, self-funding is much more used in the benefits side of things than it is property and casualty. And so that's the way that my mind thinks. And I think especially, when you look at the world of the 4 main carriers, that are kind of in charge of a lot that we do in a regular, on our regular day to day. I really think about getting our clients to a place of independence, flexibility, opportunity. You have to really kind of take away a lot of the handcuffs when it comes down to it. And I feel like you can't take away those handcuffs without involving some type of self-funding stragy.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a podcast based around it. But I do think you're right. Like your options are so limited when you stay fully insured, and like you said, the 4 kind of BUCAs dominate the market. You get 4 different carriers with a very slightly different value proposition, but ultimately your shopping rates or shopping networks. But your choice is severely limited when you do that, right? You can only buy the things that they put on the table rather than trying to build a plan. And so I couldn't agree with you more. The world opens up, and some people can see that as scary, right? Because the options are seemingly limitless at that point. But then you just lean on your advisor to be able to walk you through what's appropriate for your risk profile, your risk appetite, what your particular industry is, size, all those things. I mean, there's not a one, size fits all in self-funding, but that's what I love about it, because it's complex enough that we can talk about it for an hour, and I still think it stays interesting. I did want to ask you though about Simple Pay, because that's something I've heard a couple times, and I know you're not there anymore, but I want to hear a little bit more about that solution, if you don't mind.
So Simple Pay is genius, and you're going to continue to hear about Simple Pay. And I think Simple Pay can only grow when it comes down to it. And so I was leading the sales team for Simple Pay. And so when it comes down to it, Simple Pay is a plan design and billing model. But if we just kind of focus on the plan design side of it, what they've done is that, backed by a significant amount of data, like billions and billions of data points, that they've identified who the best providers are around the entire country. Okay. And it doesn't matter what you're going to the doctor for. They've got a rating for that provider for that specific procedure, combined with the facility that you're getting it done at. Okay. So if you've got to get, your knee replaced, you're going to be able to choose the best facility with the best provider, and your copay is going to be based on the quality that you choose.
Okay.
So you're going to have a smaller copay by going to the better provider. If you choose to go to a worse provider that has worse outcomes, you're going to get a higher copay. And so really when it looks like, for the most part, benefits consultants have focused so much on network strategies, like, hey, this network has better pricing than another network. That's pennies compared to the quarters and the dollars that you can save by getting those employees to go to all high quality providers and have less readmissions and all that kind of stuff.
How do you message that? How does that message get to the actual member that's making that choice?
In the actual plan design. And so they ended up finding out on the billing side, if they're not going to go ahead and be that consumer from the very beginning of their process of pursuing healthcare, if they're not going to be that consumer at the beginning, they're going to find out on the back end because they're going to get a bill that has a high copay. Okay, and that bill is going to say you could have chosen a better provider and had this lower copay. And so there certainly is implementation needs to be done well to get that communication to them at the very beginning. But even if not, even if the implementation, if there's a miss at the implementation and an employee doesn't find out implementation, the employees are going to find out sooner or later, especially when the employees start to talk about it. But all in all, it's a cost strategy for the employer and it's a cost strategy for the employee because the employee is going to save by going to high quality providers too.
100%. I love that there's incentivization to make better choices by lower copays or sometimes even waiving out-of-pocket expenses altogether if they choose certain locations. But is there a gatekeeping mechanism? You mentioned maybe there's a missed opportunity to open enrollment or somebody wasn't there or they missed the messaging. Is there a gatekeeping mechanism to prevent them from accidentally doing what you said and finding out afterwards that they went to the wrong place?
There's probably not a gatekeeper to prevent them from accidentally doing it, but there is so much communication that's happening. And they do have a concierge that they can lean into to kind of help them navigate that procedural stuff. There's, when it comes down to going to a family doctor or getting an MRI or something like that, there's not a huge consequence to going to a low quality or a low cost provider at that point. But when it comes down to you getting something like a knee surgery, I would hope that the patient's going to take it kind of seriously, but there's not necessarily, and I bet they're working on it now. It's been a while since I've been on that team, but there's not a gatekeeper at this point preventing them to go to a low quality provider, other than the fact that they're going to find out.
I know obviously you're not there now, but if you said you think I'm going to keep hearing about it more often. Is there something that they're doing very well versus maybe some of their competitors in the marketplace that you think is why it's going to latch on and it's going to be as big as you think it will be?
To me, it's just the story's too good.
Okay.
I mean, it just makes way too much sense. And I think when they continue to kind of evolve their strategy of getting it out to the brokers around the country and that kind of stuff, and every area, every geography has some complexities about network that they still are working through. When it comes down to it, it's a new strategy that's still, it's thriving, let's say in Boston, but it might not be thriving in Dallas, and that's really due to just kind of the boots on the ground network stuff that's going on. So sooner or later, it's going to be everywhere. I think
there's integration with was it Meritain?
Yeah.
Is that an exclusive?
Yeah, it's still going.
Okay.
Yep.
Really cool. Now I was curious about it because I feel like that's every once in a while you'll find out about a new solution that just keeps popping up and you're like, why do I keep hearing about it? Obviously they must be doing something well, but I feel like it's incumbent upon me to go, all right, well, what is it? I need to understand this in case I need to talk about it at some point. But let's talk about, you've made a transition that I think I've had a couple of gentlemen on this podcast that have made a similar transition, going from really large agency or large-ish agency down to what you might consider a boutique. I'd like to hear about, from your work life, what messaging, like what is it like going from a big player to somebody that, you're now being heavily leaned upon to get the messaging out of who you are?
Yeah. So for me, I saw it as a huge opportunity to go to a firm that, being the practice leader of this firm is really going to allow me to take everything that I've learned from some of the most intelligent expertise that there is in the market and really create a story that I think might be, one of the best stories in DFW from a broker standpoint. Wouldn't have been able to do that at a large firm for me personally, right? But at a boutique firm too, from a service side, It's kind of like I like boutique hotels. I don't know if you do.
Yeah,
I love boutique hotels. If I've got a problem at a boutique hotel, I'm probably going to be able to talk to the owner about it. Mm-hmm. And the same goes at a boutique insurance firm. That's if you've got something that happened that just, you didn't like, and even if you did something that was great, I mean, the involvement of the owner and the decision makers at a boutique firm and their awareness of what's going on at the ground level, I think pans out to really, execute a pretty good service level.
So you enjoy it. How long have you been there now? It's
6 months.
6 months. Okay,
yeah,
right.
5 to 6 months. Yeah.
You so obviously
5 months. Yeah.
Establishing the brand, establishing the messaging. Hiring some people on the team.
Yeah.
You really. It sounds like you get a chance to put your stamp right on the future of this organization, which I totally get, man. I've done the big corporate thing. Found out over time wasn't exactly resonating with me like I thought it would, and so I'm with you there. There's an entrepreneurial element to this, right? It's not completely stopping with you, but it's heavily reliant upon you. And so of course I wish you luck there, and I'm sure you'll do really well. And are you still getting to integrate golf though? You said you don't get to play as much, but are you still?
Well, I mean, anytime you have a job transition, time is limited, right?
Sure.
I would say I'm getting into the point now where, golf for me is a tool now when it comes down to it. I mean, if I was to choose how I'm going to spend 5 hours a time and it's not going to be in the office working, I'd probably rather choose it with my family than on the golf course. But if I've got an opportunity to develop relationships that just encourage me as a person, but also help business-wise, then I go to the golf course. And that time is going to allow itself, I would say, pretty soon. I'm still kind of finishing this transitional time over at BSBD and getting things ready at BSBD, but pretty soon I think I might get to golf course a little bit more, which would be nice.
What's funny, when I got into selling stop loss, I presumed, I'm gonna have to learn to golf. Every broker plays golf all the time, right? That's what they do. I had this. It's not a misconception because I'm sure there probably are some that play golf most of the time, but I realized pretty quickly, well, if I'm not doing the inviting because I'm the rep that's supposed to be paying for it, we're not going to be playing golf. So it's no big deal. But I know quite a few brokers that ideally that probably would have been the place to take them out and, connect over a couple hours of golf and beers and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really fortunate that, it's a sport that allows you the ability to build a relationship in 4 to 5 hours that's unlike anything else.
Sure.
And for me, it lets them kind of see maybe one of the skills that I have, maybe a special skill that I have. But at the same time, I get more excited about the fellowship side of it and just the getting to know each other more than just the golf side of it. So, I love it.
Do people get intimidated though when they play with you? Is anybody like?
I hope not, but I think normally when I ask somebody to play golf, they're like, "No, you don't want to play with me." I'm like, "Yes, I do."
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be asking you first of all if I didn't, but I don't mind. It's funny sometimes. You will get to play with. I don't know if you know the handicap world, but you've got scratch golfers. You've got 10 handicaps. You got 20 handicaps. Well, the 20 handicap is somebody that doesn't hit the ball straight that often and has pretty high scores on most holes. But when that 20 handicap is a blast to play with, unless that 20 handicap is looking for his ball for 5 minutes every shot, then it's just like, dude, let's just go get a bunch of balls from the range so that you've got plenty in your bag and we'll start dropping them. But yeah.
Well, that'd be me. I think triple digits I'd be lucky to break. But kind of bringing this back home, there's a couple things I do want to ask you. We touched on Simple Pay. Are there anything out there, innovative solutions that you're latching onto now that you think have a good message?
Yeah. So when you think about cost, service, and people, that's what we're focused on. On the people side, last year in October, actually, we're coming to the year anniversary. I went through a crazy amount of loss in my life. Lost both my dad, both my wife's dad, and a really, really close friend. Lost both of those dads over the course of a week. And then lost my wife's dad, and lost one of my best friends a couple months after that. And
I'm sorry to hear that, by the way. That's intense.
No, it's all right. And then I was in the throes of Q4 with Simple Pay.
Yep.
And so my mind went crazy. And it wasn't until then that I realized mental health is a real thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. I think mental health is, a lot of people have their different viewpoints of it. But I think mental health is a real problem, especially on the back end and really still in the middle of a time where a lot of people are living in solitude and they're not around people. And so when I came to BSBD and I think about the people side of what we're doing, I really wanted to investigate what I believed was the mental health best mental health solution, because there's 1,000 of them.
Okay.
Like if you go on the App Store, on your phone, you're going to find so many different mental health apps. And I would say that there's been a lot of people in the market that have created a mental health app because it's going to bring in revenue, right? But then there's also some mental health applications that are actually making a significant difference. Okay. And I think there's a number of them. But the one that I've kind of chosen to really like is called Ginger.
Ginger. Okay.
And what Ginger does is that it basically creates this mental health team around your employees.
Okay.
And so, so if you're an employer that's chosen to give Ginger to your employees, they have this team of care around them, and it starts with a lead mental health coach. There's a couple backup mental health coaches and a therapist on that 4-person team, and all they have to do is get on the app, and they can text and just say, "Man, I'm struggling today," or "Man, I opened up my computer and I can't think about a thing other than what I did last night," or something like that. Just anything that's just grinding on their mind. Or they're just burnt out and they can't think at all, And so they can reach out to that person. That person's trained to know what to talk to you about. I think their average response time is 42 seconds.
Okay.
And then, and so you just have a conversation about how you're struggling. And then if that conversation goes to a place where there needs to be clinical intervention, then they'll get you set up with that therapist where I think it's 48 hours. Okay. You'll get a conversation, actual live conversation with that therapist.
Probably virtual, right? Or Zoom?
Virtual, yeah. Okay. And that therapy session actually gets billed to the plan. Okay. So
it's through a group benefits chassis then.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. So to me, it's really cool. I mean, they're making a difference. Like they've got data that shows that they're making a difference in mental health among the populations that they're working with.
Well, were you going through that time? Was that when you were introduced to Ginger on the personal side, consuming it, I guess, or where did that actually get?
So the reason why I was aware of Ginger was the CEO of Ginger, a guy named Russ Glass, is an old friend of mine from Austin.
Oh, okay.
So when I lived in Austin, and he played at the golf course that I played at when I was playing professionally. And so I knew of him, and I've just kind of followed his career. And then all of a sudden I noticed like 4 years ago, he joined this team at Ginger. He's a CEO and started to see Ginger thrive. And so the second that I, got to BSBD and I'm really focused on that people side of what we do, I reached out to him to hear more, and it's real. It's pretty cool.
So Ginger, traditional spelling Ginger, right?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not sure. So that sounds actually really cool, and it's funny how things show up on your doorstep, right? You all those the loss that you experienced was outside of your control and it happened in a very short period of time, unfortunately. But it's interesting. Then it becomes relevant to your story. You talk about the motivation of the why, right? Like why you want to talk about it is because you had an experience, that a lot of people probably go through and don't necessarily know what is my outlet or what is my resource to talk to and things like that. And I think mental health has been popped on everybody's radar in the last 18 months simply because of the isolation, the disconnection from people. I've gone through it where it's like, man, I would like to see somebody in person. And part of the reason I have the podcast is an excuse sometimes to just have people around that I enjoy talking to because everything's been pushed to this environment. Well, you show up virtually on a camera for half an hour, and then you go back to your house. Most people are probably still in their house for the most part. So,
I know you're doing a lot of things virtually with PlanSight, and you can probably attest. I mean, when you're looking at your computer all day, it's a grind.
Yeah,
you get to the end of your day and. I mean, it's just a grind. I don't know what it is about looking at a screen. Yeah. But, it's a grind, and it really takes a toll on you.
Well, see, but to me, the other side of that is the energy, like that you get around people. Like you forget, in person with the other day I was at the gym and I had a guy help spot me on doing like a max bench press. And it was just the fact that.
What'd you max?
Oh, man, I don't want to be that guy. No, 250.
Wow.
Yeah. But anyways, it was like somebody was there holding me accountable, but it was also the energy. It was just some random guy that happened to be around. I'm like, hey, can you spot me, bro? Yeah. But it was kind of like you felt just this burst of energy because you're almost on the spot. But it was also there's a person there. Like so, it was like when I completed the lift, you're like, you had a guy validate that you did it. And it just, the energy I noticed, or you run into somebody at the gym, and you're like, hey man, what's up? And it's just, I've discovered in the last 18 months how important the social element is to my life and to my quality of life and well-being. Man. And you forget that sometimes until, you get it taken away from you. And then you're like, oh my God, like there's a part of me that I'm lacking at the moment. So I guess a long way to say, I appreciate the fact that you kind of went through that and you've latched onto something that seems like it's a really, really good solution, and you advocate for it in Ginger. So really cool. Yeah. I'll look that up. Future of the industry more broadly though, right? Private sector, public impact on healthcare. What do you see us doing in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I feel like independent networks are going to become a lot more popular. I would say, 5 years ago, talking about a reference-based pricing strategy would be crazy disruptive.
Okay.
To think about those employees going to a provider, I mean, they would probably get turned away more than they would get brought in. I think providers are used to seeing different things now on an ID card. So I would say the Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna ID card is not really necessary anymore. Okay. I still know that employers would prefer it, right? But I do believe the independent network, the reference-based pricing world of things and that kind of stuff is going to continue to grow as providers get used to seeing it, when it comes down to it. And then you think about the meta shares of this world, or Christian healthcare ministries, and just the cash payer system, just those worlds intermingling together, I think is going to make a difference because, in my opinion, the BUCAs don't necessarily have the incentive to negotiate pricing like we would want them to.
Of course
if they negotiate pricing really good, then they make less money and their shareholders aren't going to be doing very good. Exactly. So it's like, you've got to think about something outside of that when it comes down to it. And then I would say from innovation too, I really, really hope that more innovation comes to the smaller group market. We're not just a small group house, but most of the people that we run into, when you go to church or you're going to a restaurant and you meet a business owner, it's usually a small group business owner. I mean, it kind of runs America a little bit. And so, but man, there's just not much opportunity for them. And so I'm really passionate in trying to find really good opportunities for small group market. So if there's somebody listening to this and they're just like, man, I have a great small group opportunity, I want to hear about it, because it's hard to have a profitable small group practice because it has to be profitable. We're a for-profit brokerage, right? Sure. But I believe that there can be profit in small group, but still it be well done. And still have solutions that really make a difference. And so I'd love to see some innovation there.
Yeah, I got a couple of things I'll mention to you offline. I know you've talked about a few as well. I want to make sure, obviously, I steer you in the right direction. But I do think you're starting to see more things pop up in that space. And I'm very happy to hear that, right? Because it's not just your large employer that has the options anymore. Other than that, like industry-wise, I guess maybe we wrap things up. Is there anything today that you'd want to leave folks with, right? What is messaging, or Matt Brost or BSBD? Yeah. I'd love to hear kind of your parting shots, and then also don't forget where people can get a hold of you as well.
Yeah. So, I would say, maybe the answer to that is more, it's personal and work-wise. When I was considering this next transition that I'm going through, there was a number of different options that I was looking at. And, I had some really good wisdom from a mentor of mine who said, it's not really about what you're doing. It's about who you're doing it with. And at BSBD, I've got that. I mean, I've got great partners, and I've got great people that I get to do life with, not just work with every single day. And it makes a huge difference. I mean, I could be selling ice to Eskimos, but if I'm doing it with these people at BSBD, it would be a blast, and I would love doing it. I wake up every morning excited to do it. So, I would just encourage people to kind of think about that. It's not about what you do; it's who you do it with. And well, and then you can reach out to me via LinkedIn. It's a pretty easy way to get a hold of me. So
yeah, I think most of the days or time nowadays, most people are like, just connect with me on LinkedIn, right? Because you don't want to be giving away your email and phone number necessarily.
yeah. Well, emails mbrost
Yeah.
at bsbdgroup.com.
Okay, there we go. So don't spam Matt. Don't sell him lead generation services. But I actually respect what you just said, though. Like, I couldn't agree with you more on the people you work with, right? I think, especially our leadership, Dave and Steve, the guys that co-founded our company, they're my big why. Being a part of an innovative platform and things like that are fun. The technology's fun, but at the end of the day, I'm talking to them. We're strategizing together. We're selling together. We're winning and losing together. So I completely agree with you that the who you're doing with is definitely better than the what necessarily.
And what you're doing is awesome, man.
Cool.
I mean,
Thank
PlanSight is really, really cool, and we are crazy excited to be working with you.
Well, cool. So, likewise, man. Likewise, absolutely. We'll definitely, hopefully, have a very, very long and fruitful partnership.
Yeah.
So Matt Brost, appreciate you joining me.
No problem.
Thanks for talking golf and family and benefits and all things like that. Again, find Matt on LinkedIn if you're interested in BSBD, which let's say Boyd, Shackelford, Barnett, and Dixon.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, awesome, man. Well, good luck, man, and I'm very, very excited about what you're doing and hope to have you on again soon.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.